in sunny Seattle. The long siege of autumn is over, and now it's spring. For those of you who don't live in Seattle who are watching this on the internet, and thank you to all of you who watch on the internet and share with your friends. We push 40 to 75,000 views a month on the internet, and so Soul Food has a little bit of infamy. I think there are a few people here from out of state. Where are you from?
Denver.
From Denver, Colorado.
LaPorte, Indiana.
And from LaPorte, Indiana, so that have made their way to this astrologically legendary spot in Redmond, of all places. Redmond, home of Microsoft, Washington. So we are here on the last Wednesday night of April, and as I started to say, for all of those of you who watch on the internet and live in places in the northern or southern hemisphere where it's mostly summer and winter with a few weeks of transition of spring and autumn, here in Seattle we have it just the opposite. We have basically a year that's made up of spring and autumn with a few weeks of transition of summer and winter that transition from spring into autumn and from autumn back into spring. And today the sun came out, yesterday actually, and it is beautiful, and it could be all over tomorrow. Anyhow, before I jump into the content, just a couple of side notes. I'm not going to spend long on this today. I will be attending UAC, the United Astrology Conference, the end of May. That's Memorial Day weekend and the week leading up to that. You can go to uacastrology.com and find the list of the 150 or so astrologers that will be teaching there from all over the world. This is the largest astrology conference in the Western world, and in Chicago, downtown Chicago, overlooking the lake. This should be a pretty amazing week. I hope to see you there, and I will be there for its entirety and giving 2 lectures during the week. Midsummer, July 29th through August 2nd, I will be doing my summer workshop down at Brighton Bush Hot Springs. Brighton Bush is a magical place in the old-growth forest of Central Oregon, about an hour up into the mountains outside of Salem, Oregon, which is about an hour south of Portland, Oregon. It's a very cool place, and even if you don't come there to see me this summer and to work with 4 days working with the astrology, bringing the astrology planets into our lives, doing some experiential stuff, some movement stuff, it's a very magical place. Even if you don't make it there for my summer workshop, get your butts there. It's a very cool place. That's midsummer. Then on October 8th, 6th or 8th? 8th, 6th. Look it up. Heaven and Earth Workshops. heavenandearthworkshops.com. I will be doing my 10th week-long retreat with Heaven and Earth Workshops. I've done retreats with them or led retreats sponsored by Heaven and Earth Workshops. I've done retreats in Bali and Mexico, in India. I think this is my 6th or 7th Bali one. It's an absolutely magical place at a retreat center built by the owner of Heaven and Earth Workshops, a magnificently fabulous friend and person, Evelyn Roberts, and heavenandearthworkshops.com. Check it out. It's limited to 25 people. It will fill up. If you're interested, get in touch with me or get in touch with Evelyn, and it's a transformative, amazing week. If you've never been to Bali, all I can say is that if you don't come for this, get your butt there too. Brighton Bush first, Bali next. And that's pretty much all I need to say about upcoming events. How are we doing out there? You're all lying. These are interesting times, and I know that you must get bored of me saying these are interesting times, but they are. Today is April 25th. We're talking mostly or all about the month of May 2018. We have a couple of major events, one in particular that we will spend quite a bit of time talking about this evening, and quite a bit of time talking about for the next 7 years. And that would be Uranus into Taurus. A couple of people said Chiron. Chiron did move into Aries last month. We did talk about that a little bit. But Uranus is such a major player in the astrological deck, if you will. And when Uranus changes signs, as it does every 7 years, Uranus is an 84-year cycle, which means that over the 84 years, it spends about 7 years in each sign, because 7 into 84 is 12. There are 12 signs in the zodiac. So when these outer planets change signs, this is often a very powerful, sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle, but it's a very powerful shift in the social consciousness, in the zeitgeist. It's a shift in how we relate to things. Astrologers over the years have done studies, lectures, written books about the changing of these outer planets and following the generations of some of the even slower moving outer planets, like the generation of the people born in the 40s and 50s who have Pluto in Leo, followed by the generation of Pluto in Virgo and Pluto in Libra and then Scorpio. And these are different generational shifts. And when you begin to realize this and see it, you can observe it in your own lives, in your friends and people that we know, because especially for those of us who are born close to one of these outer planet shifts, chances are we have friends with the same, with the planets, outer planets in the same signs as us, but maybe a friend whose outer planet is in the sign ahead or the sign before. And once you begin to observe these, you actually can see the powerful differences of these generational influences. Well, Pluto, which can spend 12 to 25 years, because it's such an elliptical orbit in a sign. Neptune, which spends about 14 years in a sign. Uranus spends about 7. Saturn spends about 2.5 or so. And as we look at these shifts, we begin to see some very important pieces. And so because of that, I want to spend some time this evening talking about the planet Uranus and its shift on May 15th into the sign of Taurus. Now, Uranus has been in the sign of Aries since 2010. And these outer planets, all the real planets go through a retrograde motion. As we may know, Mercury was retrograde for much of this month, last month, March and April. Mercury is now going direct. But until May 2nd, Mercury is still moving through territory that it was previously retrograde in. So even though Mercury has been moving direct now for about a week, we still may feel mercurial issues. And in fact, this is the chart for today, for right now. If we look at this chart, so what we are looking here is an Aries rising chart for, this is January. Let's make this turn into now. And there we go. And here we can see, or I can see, one thing that stands out incredibly important, and that is this Mercury at 9 degrees of Aries is connected by this big fat red line, and the lines in the center of these wheels basically show the mathematical patterns, the aspects based upon divisions of a circle by a half or a quarter or a third, and so on. The red lines are aspects of stress based upon squares, that's 90-degree angle, an opposition, 180-degree angle. The blue lines are aspects of flow, which are based upon triangles and six-pointed stars. Those are trines and sextiles. The way this program works, and for those of you who want to know, and I get every month on YouTube a few people saying, what is the software that you're using? There are many excellent software programs for astrologers, and pretty much all of them are good. There's really no, whether you're using Io or Matrix or Kepler or SolarFire or Janus or Time Passages or Air software, they're all good. I happen to use this because it gives me some flexibility. I like it for teaching mode. But this is SolarFire. Okay. And SolarFire, incidentally, has versions also available for Android and Mac and an iPad, iPhone. So, the way I have this set up, though, is that the closer the aspect is to being exact, the fatter the line. So when I look at a chart like this and I see the thickness of this particular line or this one compared to the others, those stand out as being more important. Now, this one is to the moon, and I'm going to actually disconnect the moon from this pattern because the moon moves so quickly, it moves in and out of aspects over the course of hours. And so I'm going to just simply, for now, aspected points, and I'm going to remove the moon just so that when we're doing this work, that we'll look at the moon, but that's not the buzz of the month, that's the buzz of the hour or of the day. In fact, the moon is your mood. Because you see, moods are always changing. If you're sitting with your husband, your wife, your lover, your friend, your kid, your parent at breakfast one day, and you look out over the newspaper in front of your coffee, you look out over the newspaper and you go, oh my God, what did I do? Now, we all have bad moods like that. We didn't sleep well. They bugged us last night. Our kid was, arrested for whatever it is. We have shit that goes on in our lives, and we get into bad moods. And there's nothing wrong with having that kind of a feeling. But the thing about the moon, about feelings, about moods, is that they always change. Now, if you're sitting at coffee the next day, and the moon is still in the same sign, because the moon changes signs every couple of days, and you look out over your newspaper and you go, oh my God, it's even worse today. Well, that's not good news, but if it's okay by day 3, you can write the whole thing off as simply a bad mood, a bad moon rising. But if you wake up and every morning for days or weeks at a time, or months even, you have that same feeling, dude, you're not in a bad mood. You're in a bad Saturn, or a bad Uranus, or a bad Pluto. You see, the moon moves so fast that our moods come and go. Feelings are always changing. So that was all a reason why I took the moon out of this picture. But now let's come back to this thick, fat line here between Mercury at 9 degrees of Aries and Saturn at 9 degrees of Capricorn. These two planets are 90 degrees from one another. And in fact, over the past month, Mercury, which had moved into Aries about a month ago, then moved forward, turned retrograde on March 22nd at 16 degrees of Aries, went backwards until April 15th to 4 degrees of Aries. On April 15th, Mercury turned direct again, and now moving direct, it's at 9 degrees of Aries. But here's the thing. What this means is that Mercury squared Saturn 3 times. It went direct, squaring it in mid-March, then back over it April, and now toward the end of April again. And I know we're talking about May, but we're looking at April. But I want to make this point because as Mercury is moving direct, even though it's moving direct, Saturn is a restraining. It's a contractive. It's a testing. It's the taskmaster. It's karma. You got to do this if you're going to get that. And so until Mercury is free from Saturn, and in fact even free from the square to Mars and Pluto, we'll get to that because that is in May, we're going to still feel like we're being restrained a bit. Mercury still feels like it's retrograde, even if it's going backwards. Are you with me here? So we still may have stuff to deal with. And in fact, even yesterday, today, tomorrow, as Mercury makes that exact square to Saturn, we may have Mercury retrograde type stuff that happens that is frustrating. Now, does anybody have personal stories? I don't want to hear them, but do we have any? Oh, no. Okay, it's the laugh of recognition. All right. So, this square is very important. It's happening now. In fact, it's happening now. So this talk tonight is largely a Mercury square Saturn talk. What is Mercury square Saturn? Well, Mercury in Aries is about wanting to talk about new things. Mercury is communication. Aries is the pioneer. Mercury in Aries is fast thinking. Mercury in Aries is like machine gun delivery. Okay. True confession. My Mercury is at 9 degrees of Aries. Wow. So I'm actually having a Mercury return, and you need to just deal with it. However, my Mercury return is squaring Saturn, which means I'm also having Saturn in the sky squaring Mercury. Now, I'm not here to talk about my chart. I'm simply trying to point out how these events in the sky can impact your chart because of where the planets are in your birth. And so certainly with Mercury square Saturn, what happens is we bump up against structure. We have to in some way deal with the taskmaster, Saturn, the deadline, which I personally am dealing with right now in my life. I don't want to bother you with my personal story. But I'm feeling this Mercury square Saturn. And yet we all are to some extent, but if we have planets at the points where charts, if we have planets in our natal chart where the planet's moving in the sky making an aspect, then it's like the cosmos has your name on it. It's like saying, Rick, this one's for you. No thanks. You don't have a choice. Okay. So we're moving into May, and I think the most important thing about May is this shift of energy from Aries into Taurus, which happens every year toward the end of April, because toward the end of around the 20th of every month is when the sun moves from one sign to the next. So we've had a month of the sun in Aries, and now the sun is about 5 days or 6 degrees into the sign of Taurus. But over this month, we're going to have Uranus, the middle of May, moving into Taurus, which means that the sun and Uranus will be in Taurus. And then because Mercury moves so fast, Mercury will be catching up to it. And so we have this whole shift of energy from Aries into Taurus, along with Uranus, which hasn't been in Taurus. The last time Uranus was in Taurus was in 1942, because Uranus takes 84 years to go around once. So Uranus moved into Taurus back in 1934, and it moved out of Taurus finally in 1941-42. So we'll talk more about that in just a moment, but I wanted to give you a flavor of how the shift from Aries, which is the first sign of the zodiac, the fire starter. Aries says, go, do it. Normally it's get ready, get set, go, but with Aries it's ready, go, then get set. It's the proverbial shoot first, ask questions later, which is when spring starts, when anything begins, we have that energy and the enthusiasm and the magic of the creation. When you see a seed sprout, just touch above the ground, and you see this little point of green, you don't know whether that's a piece of grass, a dandelion, or an oak tree. Because Aries is undifferentiated energy, expressing from apparently nowhere into somewhere. That's what Aries is about. It's the sign of creation. The problem, or a problem, with Aries is that it's really good at starting things. Why is that a problem? Well, it's not a problem if you have a staff that completes the shit that you start. The problem is that Aries is really good at starting things. And sometimes the staying power, the endurance, the stamina, the follow-through of Aries can be lacking. And this is where the magic of Taurus comes into the flow of how the signs evolve from Aries through Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra. Okay, so Aries starts. It's the initial thrust. It's the push forward. It's the Mars planet. It's the Mars sign, because Mars is about defending territory or inserting into new territory. It's sharp objects that go into places where they don't normally go unless there's precision or sharpness. So when the energy shifts from Aries into Taurus, what happens in nature, in the northern hemisphere at least, is that those sprouts that kind of came from nowhere into being and were just green and magically created, the Taurus shift is that they get wood. That sounds wrong. They get the new growth becomes stemmy. It becomes structured. It has stability. And Taurus is about taking the energy that was created and making it real. Taurus is about the three-dimensional world. It's about things that have substance. And the planet associated with Taurus is Venus. Now, most of the inner planets, well, actually, all the planets up through Saturn in traditional astrology each are related to two different signs. For example, Mars is the planet of Aries and Scorpio. Modern astrology, we've thrown Pluto there. In ancient or traditional astrology, Venus is the planet of Taurus and Libra. And the difference is this. Venus is the planet of love and beauty and harmony and nice things and attraction and desire and sweetness and all those lovely words. Okay. In Taurus, it's physical. In Libra, it's mental. Libra is an air sign. Air is mental. Taurus is an earth sign. It's of the senses. It's practical. It's grounded. So Venus in Taurus is about the sensation of things that are real, like a nice day. See, Aries, even though it's the first sign of spring or the first sign of the year, Aries can be very cold. It's considered to be a barren sign, that the real life and the warmth and the yumminess doesn't begin until Venus comes into the equation in Taurus. So we have this energy of Aries kind of pushing into new ground and Taurus making it real. Now, here's the interesting piece about this month, about May, because even though Taurus is about making things real, and I have one too many pieces of paper here because I do. Okay, we can set that one aside, we can set that one aside, and this one. All right, so we're looking at Mercury moves into Taurus on May 13th. I'm going to just bump this ahead, then we'll come back a bit. So we're going to watch here, we're going to watch Mercury, and we're going to watch Mercury gain on Uranus. Mercury will line up with Uranus. Mercury will move into Taurus. By then, the sun, which moves a degree a day, will be all the way down here toward the middle of the sign. But Mercury will gain on Uranus, catch up with Uranus, move into Taurus, then Uranus right behind it. Uranus right now is at 28 degrees, 54 minutes. It's close to being in the last 1 degree of its 30-degree hunkering down in Aries. And Uranus, when Uranus moved into Aries, it touched into Aries in May of 2010, backed into Pisces, And then it moved into Aries for its final, because of that retrograde thing. It moved into Aries on March 11th, actually, March 11th, 2011. And that was the day of the Fukushima earthquake, meltdown, nuclear disaster, tidal wave, whatever. Now, am I suggesting that Uranus's shift into Taurus on May 15th will have that magnitude of accompanying event? Don't have a clue. It'll be nice to be able to look back and go, wow, that happened, it was awesome, and it was good. We don't know. Uranus doesn't care about good or evil. Uranus just cares about breaking up the energy that's stressful. That's Uranus's job. We'll talk more about Uranus in a few minutes. But let me run this ahead so that you can see here what I was talking about. So we're going to do this a day at a time. And here we got, let's change this to a day at a time. Okay, so here we're on the 25th. And there's the 26th, the 27th. That was 10 days at a time. Let's go back. Oh, my God. All right, here we go. So now we're going a day at a time. There's the 26th, the 27th. You can see Mercury moving. It's almost at 11 degrees now. Mercury is gaining speed, still coming out of its retrograde. There's the 1st of May. Let's stop here on the 1st of May just for a moment. And note the fact that Mercury is now in the middle of Aries. Remember, Mercury turned retrograde at 16 degrees of Aries. And what that means is that, it's moving a little fast. Slow that down. What that means is that on May 2nd, Mercury reaches the point where it turned retrograde back on March 22nd, I think it was. Pretty close. So really, it's May 2nd becomes the first day when we feel like we're actually moving into new territory. It might feel like, even though things are moving ahead, it's like we've been here before. It's Yogi Berra's famous bad line, it's deja vu all over again. So on the 2nd, Mercury it moves out of its shadow. It hits its point where it turned retrograde. And as it continues to move on, you can see here that it gains, and as it does that, right around the 5th and 6th, Mercury squares Pluto, which is a very intense energy, and this is about communicating things that are beneath the surface. Pluto is the unconscious. It's the lord of the underworld. It's that which is hidden. And when Mercury squares Pluto, Mercury has a very special relationship with Pluto that one of these days I will do a half-hour YouTube specifically on this because it's such a fascinating story. And that is that when Pluto took Ceres, the goddess of the fruit of the earth, her daughter Persephone, Pluto took her into the underworld and made her queen of the underworld against Mom and Persephone's preferences. But Ceres went to Jupiter, the king of the gods, the king of Olympus, and said, "Help me get my daughter back." And Jupiter goes, "Can't do it. I can't go into the hell realms. Even though I'm a god, I can't cross the river Styx into the hell realms and retain my memory." He goes, "But we can send Mercury." So Mercury became the first shuttle diplomat who went in, because Mercury has no substance. Mercury is just the messenger. And Mercury goes back and forth between these worlds, this world, and the underworld. It's talk therapy. It's how we bring stuff up through talk by bringing it into awareness. And so, like I said, there's a longer story here. But when Mercury squares Pluto, it's the stress, it's the conflict between what we're saying and what's going on hidden. And so often this is a time when things can come up that may not be pleasant, but need processing and really can make great and powerful changes. So as we follow that Mercury closer, it squares Pluto May 5th, 6th, and then by May 13th, it actually catches up with Uranus. Can you see that right there? Or on May 12th, and you'll see if I click it one more day, boom, it's on the other side, and it's moved into Taurus. Can you see what I'm looking at right there? There's Mercury at 29 degrees of Aries. Uranus is at 29:51 Aries. It's at the very last moment of Aries. So for the next couple of weeks, we're seeing a culmination of the 7 years' work that Uranus has done in Aries, busting into new ground. And now as it moves into Taurus, there's going to be this whole sense of containment around Uranus. But first, Mercury lines up with Uranus, and that is on the 13th. Mercury lines up with Uranus on the 13th, moves into Taurus later the same day, that morning. And then on the 15th, at 4:47 a.m., and that's Pacific time. There it is right there, and it's on the 15th, and let's back that up so that we can get it approximately the right time. That's close enough, right? Come on. Right there. So this is the new moon in Taurus. So the new moon in Taurus occurs at 24 degrees of Taurus. Mercury is already in Taurus. Mercury has already, as it's changed signs, it not only joined up with Uranus, but the two of them squared Mars. This is an incredibly powerful dynamic. This is really the meat of the change of what May is all about, because Mars actually moves into Aquarius just a few hours after the new moon, as does Uranus moving into Taurus. So you can see here this moment is like it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's pregnant with change. It's like it can't be stopped. Because we have Mars at the last degree of Capricorn. Remember, Mars has liked being in Capricorn because in Capricorn, Mars finishes what it starts. In traditional astrology, Mars is considered to be exalted in Capricorn. It does well there. So this Mars squaring Uranus is like unexpected shit coming out. Mars and Uranus is like, it's like the lightning striking, and there's a bit of anger attached to this also. So we might have a few days, I think we've already had a few years. We might have a few, this might be a rough spot geopolitically, because Mars and Uranus together kind of can create a little bit of a hair trigger. You know, there's that sense of where we're so ready for this change, and because it's at the absolute, that Mars square Uranus actually doesn't occur until they're in the next sign, but we can feel it. They're so close. It's like we may be panicking about, oh my God, I've missed my chance. I should have done. I didn't. And then we overcompensate. You know, because Uranus's job is to relieve the tension. And so here we have Mercury moving into Taurus. Then we have this new moon in Taurus. Then Uranus moving from Aries after 7 years of being in Aries into Taurus, and Mars moving into Aquarius. Now, having done, and let me just say a couple of things here about a new moon in Taurus. This is a very stable new moon. The moon loves being in Taurus, like Mars loves being in Capricorn. The moon is exalted in Taurus. Why? Because the moon is our moods and they're always changing. And Taurus is solid. So the moon feels really comfortable with its changing moods because it doesn't feel insecure. It knows that Taurus is going to have its back, so to speak. So what I would like to do is I would like to jump over to to a couple of slides that I have so that you can get a sense of what this Uranus in Taurus is actually like. And so this was actually this is an hour and 15-minute talk that I did at NORWAC at a conference. I'm not going to go through it. I've taken out about 15 slides just to give you a flavor. My talk was, and this is available from NORWAC, they sell the recordings. This is basically just to give you a flavor of what Uranus and Taurus might look like. And the title of my talk was Breaking Up is Hard to Do. Why? Because in Aries, it was just ideas being shattered. There was new thoughts, new ideas, new ways of looking at things. But in Taurus, because Taurus is Earth, and Taurus is contracted Earth, it holds it together. Taurus is the most stable of all the Earth signs. When Uranus hits Taurus, Uranus is not as comfortable there because Uranus wants change. Uranus wants to break things up. It wants to open up minds. It's like lightning striking. And so when Uranus hits Taurus, it has to work harder, but the changes that it makes are bigger. So Uranus is the weird planet. You know, it's on its side, unlike any other planet. Its rings are like what the North and South poles would be. In fact, it moves like a bowling ball. The North Pole is actually there. It faces the sun. So Uranus is totally weird. But I like to think of Uranus as the quantum planet because somehow Uranus is the planet of uncertainty. It's the planet that crosses the boundary between fate and free will. In fact, most astrologers, when you have a Uranus transit in your chart, they'll tell you this famous line, expect the unexpected. And how the fuck do I do that? Expect the unexpected. But this is the paradox of Uranus. It's like during a storm, we know the lightning is going to strike, but we don't know where and we don't know when. And so we're expecting it, but when it happens, it's a shock in more ways than one. And in fact, I often look to nature to get an understanding of what the planets are like, and Uranus is actually like lightning. In fact, you don't get lightning and Uranus doesn't make an action occur unless there's tension. Tension is required. And in fact, when the tension is great enough and then Uranus comes into the picture, then something happens. And there's basically two energies in the universe. There's compression and tension. Compression pushes two things closer together, and tension pulls them further apart. For those of you who are astrology geeks, conjunctions are compression. Oppositions are tension. Because in a conjunction, the two planets are trying to get into the same place, and that creates its own issue. With an opposition, the two planets are apart, we're in the middle, and it's almost like a tug of war with us being in the middle, and we're trying to somehow bring those two energies together, and that's the difference between tension and compression. But Uranus is about tension, not compression. And in fact, when lightning strikes, in that moment, it releases whatever the pent-up energy is. And that's the way Uranus moves, that's the way Uranus acts, whether it's on a mundane level historically, again, going back to the Fukushima disaster, whether it's there are certainly other things. I mean, you can't make up a lot of this stuff as good as it actually is good. Some of it isn't good. I mean, the fact that the planet Uranus was on the midheaven at the moment that the first uranium atomic bomb was dropped in Nagasaki. I may have that mixed up with Nagasaki and Hiroshima. One was a plutonium one. But the plutonium bomb, Pluto was active in the chart, and the uranium atom bomb, Uranus was. Uranus is about lightning. It's sudden, it's unexpected, but it resolves tension. It brings things into awareness. Uranus actually is sometimes referred to as the Great Awakener. It's uncertain until it strikes, but then the lights go on. And when the lights go on, boom! It's like the shock of awakening. And it's like it allows us to break through boundaries that, and this is a good slide because Saturn is the boundary. Saturn has moved into Capricorn, an earth sign. Saturn is at home in Capricorn. It's one of the signs that in traditional astrology that it rules. It's its home sign. And Uranus now moving into Taurus, basically the Uranus and Saturn are both in similar elements. They're both in earth signs. And so you can think of Saturn as these walls of stability. You can think of it as a wall being built between two countries. Go there. And Uranus basically comes and shatters it. It busts through. And again, as the great awakener, Uranus is the light bulb going on over our head. Uranus is the future. It's technology. And I want to just say something. We could talk a lot more about this, but Uranus was in Taurus in the mid-30s into the early 40s. And there was, in Europe, actually all around the planet, there was a reaction to the freedom of Uranus and Aries. And that reaction was a political move to the right. There was a political move toward a rise of mass fascism, of government control. We had Hitler, Tito, Mussolini, Stalin, as just a few. And so, in some ways, with Uranus now moving into Taurus, we're seeing this politically occurring also. And this is not a prediction about what will happen or when it will happen. It's a larger statement of the zeitgeist of the planet. German has some good words that English just doesn't have. All right. So, Uranus in Taurus. Taurus is the sign of the money. Taurus is things of value. And so while Uranus in Taurus, there are people who are talking about economic revolution. People are talking about change of currencies, the whole cyber currency, cryptocurrencies. These are things that may come into importance as Uranus in its 7 years is moving through Taurus. Also in Taurus, we have more of, and this was set up, I think, by Jupiter's move into Scorpio. Scorpio, that which is hidden. Jupiter, the magnifying lens. But I think the whole change of gender recognition, not only in our individual lives, but actually in institutions. And again, because we're talking about Taurus, we're looking at business, banking, government stuff, and the continuation of the quote-unquote #MeToo movement. These are not things that are just kind of come and gone. They're not fads. The Uranus movement into Taurus is going to see Uranus breaking up traditions and values that we thought were as solid as the ground we walk on, except like earthquakes, the Uranus in Taurus is going to create lifequakes. The other thing about Taurus is it's about the sustenance. It's about food. And I think that with Uranus in Taurus, this idea of being more aware culturally, not just in isolated pockets like Seattle, where people are more aware, I think, of factory farming, of veganism, of various other ways of approaching the crisis that we're creating by the current eating of the poisons that we largely are. I know that's in itself a whole long run, and I'm not going there right now. I'm just saying that Uranus and Taurus is going to bring these kinds of things more into being as we look at some of these issues of factory food, veganism, GMOs, and just the toxicity of what we have in our food system. The idea of global warming, which most of my conscious friends have now reworded as global weirding. And I'm not saying it's not warming, but it's just the changes and the upheaval of what we thought were normalized patterns will continue, and with Uranus in Taurus, we will see more of that. Remember, Taurus is physical, and so this idea of things in the past that were discovered while Uranus was in Taurus is kind of an interesting thing. I've just cherry-picked a few. There's a huge list here. But static electricity, the periodic table of elements, something that's so stable, was conceived while Uranus was moving through Taurus. The idea of animal magnetism or animal electricity, the test that I think it was Galvani had a dead frog and took an electrical current on the leg of a frog and it twitched. And that was the first time there was this realization that the body has an electrical component and that what we call nerves are actually nervous energy is electricity. I mean, we take it for granted, but that was discovered while Uranus, the planet of lightning, of electricity, was moving through Taurus, the planet of material reality. Many other things. So the real question here is, and again, this was just meant as a tip of an iceberg overview, is that as Uranus changes signs, it shifts something about the wellspring of consciousness. It doesn't change everything. It's just Uranus is about the when the lightning strikes and we go, I got it. There's something about that as Uranus changes signs, where that comes from is very different when Uranus is in Aries and we're very eager to go to something new and different and just kind of have a concept. But when Uranus is in Taurus, it has to be tied to practical reality. It's pragmatic, and yet it won't stop the shifts. Okay, enough there. Let's come back to charts. So we're back to May, and we're actually looking at a couple of things I didn't talk about on the way to this incredible new moon where everything changes. But on May 8th, we have on May 8th, the sun is exactly opposite Jupiter. And in fact, that's an interesting period of time because Jupiter is kind of in the limelight from a number of different points. We have this long-term aspect that we'll talk about more in just a few minutes of Jupiter trining Neptune. We talked about that back in late November because Jupiter trined Neptune for the first of 3 times. I guess we're talking about it now. Jupiter trined Neptune for the first of 3 times back in December, which means that we would have talked about it during the November talk. And I have these dates here somewhere also, but there they are. Yeah, December 2nd, Jupiter trined Neptune. Jupiter had just moved into Scorpio. Neptune is in Pisces. Then on May 25th, Jupiter retrogrades back over that exact same point, and it trines Jupiter again on May 25th. But remember, Jupiter is moving pretty slowly, so we're going to feel this energy all through the month of May. That Jupiter backing into its trine to Neptune. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But then Jupiter backs all the way up, turns direct, and as it turns direct, it goes back across that same trine to Neptune for the 3rd and final time on August 19th. So what we have here is a 9-month period from last December up through this August of Jupiter trining Neptune, with it more exact in the middle end of May as an intermediate point in all of this. So what does this mean? Well, if I told you that during the great Indonesian tidal wave on the full moon on Christmas Day of 2000, I can't remember, I think maybe, that on that day Jupiter was trining Neptune, you might go, oh my God, that's terrible. And it certainly was terrible. I mean, over 250,000 people perished in a flash. Well, in a whoosh, not a flash. Uranus would be a flash. See, these are subtle differences, but they really help us understand the nature of the planets. Uranus is a flash. That's a lightning strike. Neptune and Jupiter are more expansive, and so it doesn't happen instantaneous. There's actually a flow. Now, we can say this was an incredibly horrible event that killed so many people, and that may be true from our point of view and from those people's points of view. But trines release energy, and it may be that if that energy wasn't released gradually in that tidal wave, I say gradually, it was still fairly instantaneous. If it wasn't released in that way, there may have been an earthquake or volcano that blew off half the planet. In other words, when energy expresses, our judgment of whether it's good or bad is not the whole picture. That's all I'm saying, is we have to be careful about trines being good or squares being bad. What this really represents is it represents a tidal wave of consciousness that is expressing, and in some ways this is part of that whole Me Too movement that's really not about that movement. It's about a much deeper, wider, more profound change of awareness and consciousness that we're going through. Because when Jupiter and Neptune connect, you see, Jupiter and Neptune have something in common. Jupiter and Neptune, it was mentioned that they both are connected with Pisces. In traditional astrology, Jupiter was ruled or was connected to both Sagittarius and Pisces. In modern astrology, Neptune has been given to Pisces, which has kind of taken away Jupiter's watery, emotional component and stuck him off in opinion land. That's another whole story about how our views of the planets change historically because of the new modern rulers take a piece of an old planet and kind of, say, this ain't your job anymore. We got so-and-so to cover you here. It's Mars, which used to be more passionate and wet and emotional. When Pluto was given to Scorpio, all of a sudden Mars just had Aries, and so he was kind of, put off in the corner of, carrying swords and guns, and that's it. Mars was a lover. So Jupiter and Neptune have something in common, and that's Pisces. But what they both have in common is an expansive energy that is oddly... It's a yang energy, but it has a feminine sense to it. And what I mean by that is that both of those energies are expansive, but Jupiter can only expand so far because Saturn is in the way. Could someone get me a glass of water, please? Thank you. That Jupiter can only expand so far because it bumps into Saturn. And therefore, thank you very much. And therefore, Jupiter is restrained by reality. Saturn, reality. Neptune, in my way of thinking, is simply Saturn. Now let me do this again. Neptune, in my way of thinking, is simply Jupiter freed from the bind of Saturn. In other words, Jupiter can only expand up to Saturn, but Neptune can expand forever. There's nothing that holds Neptune back. So Jupiter is about philosophy and big ideas, but big ideas and philosophies have to have some structure to them. They have to have logic. They're contained by Saturn, whereas Neptune expands forever. It's dreams, it's imagination. There is no boundary. So when Jupiter and Neptune are trine, as they are during this time, it's a time where our dreams can be encouraged. And in fact, there's a working synthesis between Jupiter working within the realms of Saturn and Neptune working outside of the realms of Saturn. And I think that this may be subtle, because trines with outer planets often are, but I think that this is maybe a piece of this deeper change of awareness that we have going on that in some way is countering some of the horrific things that are going on a international, global political level. Enough said there, but I want to come back to this chart of May 8th. Jupiter and Neptune, the exact trine is not until May 25th. But even here, they're within a couple of degrees. I mean, Jupiter is backing into this trine, so they're pretty close already. And the Sun is opposite Jupiter on the 8th, and Venus is coming into a quincunx with Jupiter, and that is on the... Where is it? That is on the... there it is, on the 11th. Oh, no, it's on the 9th, so it's just right there. So this little pattern that we have here really is emphasizing Jupiter, and that's good news, but remember, Jupiter isn't always just good news. It can be too much. I sometimes say, Jupiter, it's the too much of a good thing is not necessarily a good thing. Even a good thing in quantity will kill you. Pick your poison, And in fact, sometimes the difference between a poison or a toxin, which astrologically is related to Neptune, is just a difference of quantity. Jupiter doesn't go beyond its bound. But here, Jupiter is in the picture, and so we may see some really big movements, not only geopolitically, climatologically, economically, internationally, but again, those things are always reflected in our individual personal lives. And so here, Jupiter with the Sun, this is about relationship. Why relationship? All oppositions in some ways are a dance between the opposites, and the primal opposite is the internal and the external. Me and you. Or you and you. Okay. So, moving on, that's a big one. That's an important series of events around May 7th, 8th. By the 9th, Venus, which here is trining, come on, where's my mountain? But Venus, which is quincunxing Jupiter, if we move this another couple of days forward, then Venus moves into quincunxing Pluto, and the Sun moves into trining Pluto. So it's almost like the emphasis from the 7th, 8th, 9th to the 10th, 11th, 12th is from this thing of, it looks good, everything is bigger, everything is better, to Pluto, oh shit. And, again, Pluto isn't bad, it just brings stuff up that once it's up, we can't put it back down. This is the classic, Pandora's box being opened, and you can't stuff all that crap back into where it came. It's once the light goes on and you're aware of something, you're aware of it. And so we may see some of this through that period of time. And this then, of course, leads up to the change that we talked about earlier, and that is on the 12th. The moon in Aries is lining up with Mercury and Uranus, and I only mention that because we have the Uranus, the Mercury lining up with Uranus. The moon is right there, and this is all coming into the new moon. And we can see now the Sun is in Taurus, the moon is in Taurus, Mercury is in Taurus, and then by the 15th, boom, we have Uranus in Taurus also. And so there's this tremendous shift of energy from the conceptual, from the idea of the possibility of the newness, the excitement, the enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is a good Aries word. Enthusiasm comes from, I think it's Greek, entheos. Theos means God. Enthusiasm is like with God. It's like when the ego doesn't get in the way, we are enthused. And it's that energy of not having a perspective or a point of view that Aries, even though Aries could be considered to be a selfish sign because it only knows itself, it's the baby of the zodiac, it's the I, me, mine sign, the fact is that the entire universe is part of that I, me, mine. It's the baby whose entire universe consists of fingers and toes. It's not selfish. It's everything is represented there. And so, so what happens is this shift from Aries into Taurus is about kind of finding a place and putting things, giving things substance, making things real. But Uranus is there. And by the way, I just want to mention that someone in last month's YouTube on the comments said you really should comment something about Queen Elizabeth, who's, getting up there in age. Actually, she was getting up there in age 20 years ago. I have not looked at her chart, but I'm just mentioning this because this person who is a Brit, I imagine, does know her chart. And if I'm totally off the wall here, I'll get comments on my YouTube channel in a few days. But apparently, Queen Elizabeth was born with her sun at 0 degrees of Taurus. So she was her birthday was, I guess, then just this last week. What that means is that if Uranus in through May is moving from Aries into Taurus, that means from Queen Elizabeth's point of view, Uranus is coming around to the place in her chart where her sun is. Now, Uranus lines up with all the planets in each of our charts once every 84 years. I'm an Aries sun, and I can attest, and I will not share this whole story with you now for a number of reasons, but I can attest to the fact that once every 84 years, when Uranus lines up with your sun, all kinds of shit happens. And it's not necessarily bad. Again, Uranus doesn't know good from bad. Uranus only knows about breaking up tension. Uranus only knows that if there's tension, the lightning strikes. If you've been burying shit in your life and you got a pain in your big toe, Uranus will come along and explode that toe. Physical things are tied to consciousness often, because our unconsciousness is not in our brain. Our unconsciousness is in every cell of our body. And often when we have these Uranian awakenings or crises, the word crises, as you may know in Chinese, comes from opportunity and emergency. So there's this sense that when Uranus lines up with your sun, that there can be awakenings, crises, opportunities, openings, sudden changes. If Uranus is lightning, and I've said this before from this stage, that it's like when lightning strikes back around 25 years ago, there was a terrible forest fire from lightning strikes, and pretty much all of Yellowstone Park was devastated. And naturalists were saying, this is the worst thing that ever happened. Yellowstone is lost. It was the greatest natural resource, blah, 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 blah. And here we are, 20 some odd years later, and the same naturalists are saying that the flora and fauna in Yellowstone are healthier than they've ever known it to be, ever. Because often we have to clear out the underbrush for the new growth to occur. And that's part of Uranus's job. Now, what does that mean when Uranus lines up with your sun? And what might this mean for Queen Elizabeth II, I think? We will see. I don't know. I'm only mentioning it because if you were born with the sun at the or any planet for that matter, at the very end of Aries or the very beginning of Taurus, then the shift of Uranus from Aries into Taurus has your name on it. All right, let's move on. We got a couple of other things to catch up on, and let's just see how we're doing. Yeah, we're pushing. Okay, so we have Uranus. Okay, so the middle of the month, new moon in Taurus, kind of setting the stage, planting the seed. If you're into ritual, and I hope that you are, because as my dear friend Caroline Casey once said, the gods don't understand English. They don't speak. You can't talk to them in English. You can pray, but they don't understand English. And she says, as Caroline, only Caroline can say, she says, they don't even understand Spanish. They understand ritual. They understand action. Now, I'm not saying, let me put this in the positive, having the right thoughts and creating the right intentions, I think, is incredibly important and powerful. But you have to grease the path. You have to give it some way of allowing it to come into action. And this is what ritual is about, whether you're doing formal ritual within a church or an organization, or with a coven or a group of people, or by yourself, or in nature. Ritual is the way in which you invite the planets to do their stuff. And when you combine intention with ritual, then you're talking some serious shit. And so this new moon is an incredibly powerful new moon because there's so much change wrapped up in it. Because we have Mars moving from steadying, building momentum, energy, Capricorn, into electric Uranus. Mars doesn't do as well in, electric Aquarius. Mars doesn't do as well in Aquarius, but when it's hot, it's hot. And when it's not, it's not. So we have Mars moving into Aquarius and squaring that Uranus that's just moving into Taurus. We have this new moon, which is the most stable of all the 12 new moons. And so this is suggesting that the seeds of intention that we plant, the things that we want to manifest, that if we do in a microcosmic, fractal, small version of what we want it to be over the course of the next weeks, months, and years. And I say years, I wouldn't normally say that around a new moon ritual, but because we're catching the wave of Uranus moving into a new sign, the wave that we're catching is really planting the seed of intention, not just for this lunar phase of the next 28, 29 days, but of the entire 7 years of when Uranus is in Taurus. So this is an incredibly important, powerful period of time. Moving on, so we have Mars moving into Aquarius. There we got that right there. And moving on, we have then the next significant thing, and of course the Mars square Uranus, the 16th. Again, unstable, exciting, but unstable periods of time. And again, for some people, instability is the most frightening thing in the world. And for other people, it's the most exciting thing in the world. Because there are some of us that grew up in environments when there was instability, we could get away with shit. When everyone is so busy tied up with something that it's a time when you can accomplish a whole lot that's outside the observation of Saturn, if you will. And so these are not good or bad, but it's a very intense and changeful period of time around this new moon. And the Mars square Uranus on the 16th. And then by the 19th, Venus, which has been moving through Gemini, by the 19th, Venus moves into Cancer. And this is definitely a softening of the energy. We're also there on the last day of the sun in Taurus, because the following day, on the 20th, the sun moves from Taurus into Gemini. And so this is a shift of energy. Taurus was about bringing the energy in, about making it real, about determination, about stability and solidity, about being steadfast, about Swami Bua said, inch by inch, it's a cinch. Yard by yard, it's hard. This is a Taurian kind of a thing. It's like any progress is better than no progress, but it's the tortoise and the hare kind of a thing. That when we have all these planets, and especially the Sun and Mercury in Taurus, there's this sense of little bits of progress every day is really what works. But then when Venus moves into Cancer, and then the sun moves into Gemini, the energy shifts, because in Gemini it's about, oh, well, that looks good, and so does that. And the energy becomes a bit more scattered, but we also become a bit more animated. We become a bit more intrigued and interested about things that maybe were not part of our inch by inch in the previous month. And the Venus in Cancer, we'll talk more about next month because this really, it doesn't move into Cancer until toward the end of this month. But Venus in Cancer is sensitive. It's sweet. And she can be invisible there. All planets moving into Cancer have a tendency to go quiet. And it doesn't mean that they don't feel, and it doesn't mean that they're not strong and powerful, but that Venus moving into where she has been for the rest of May in Gemini, she's been liking all these different things. The Taurus stuff has been keeping her grounded, keeping us grounded, but we're intrigued by this and that and this and that, and we move into Venus moves into Cancer, and rather than being so distracted by something else, we're now wanting to hold on to what we have and grow it deeper. Then, as we move on, the Sun moves into Gemini. Mercury reaches that same opposition point to Jupiter that the Sun did back on May 8th. And again, we're talking about relationships. We're talking about big things, big ideas. And Mercury moves into that same pattern that the Sun had, where it's going to oppose Jupiter, and then it's going to trine Pluto. And so again, we go from the pushing of something that's making it bigger and really taking an opportunity, maybe taking it too much or too far, and then having it trine Pluto. And the Mercury trines Pluto on the 25th. And that is an incredibly powerful day for communicating things of meaning, depth. Again, we're back to Mercury and Pluto, the psychopomp, the shuttle diplomat, going into the underworld, and cutting the deal with the devil, if you will. And I think we see some of that as we get closer toward the end of the month. We also have here one other thing that's very significant, and that is Venus in Cancer moves in opposition to Saturn in Capricorn. Venus and Saturn are an interesting pair because they can work well together, but usually they're so different they don't. Because Venus is warm and Saturn is cold. Venus is ameliorating, it's sweet, and Saturn is judgmental and creates boundaries. Venus melts boundaries. Venus puts us at ease. Saturn puts us on guard. And so when Venus opposes Saturn, we may find ourselves in a relationship where the energy is cooling off, or where we are redefining boundaries in order to sustain them. It's not, again, we have to be careful with the good or bad thing, because Venus and Saturn together can be incredibly powerful loyalty, because there's that staying power, the holding. Saturn is the super glue. And if we can, rather than going into denial, often with oppositions we go into denial with one planet or the other. So Venus in Cancer, oh, I love my feelings, they're mine, whatever, you're mean to me, I'm going away, I hate you. Yeah, I'm not saying that's the way it will work, but that's one way. But what that just did is that put Saturn into denial. On the other hand, the Venus-Saturn can be so Saturnian, we need to make this work, we need to make rules, we need to figure out how we're going to get through this month or through our lives, where the kids are going to be going to school, whatever it is. And we do this, and it's so mechanical and so structured that there's no place for the warmth or the romance or the feelings. And the I was going to say trick, it's not a trick, the practice with oppositions is to keep both planets in mind. And so as we move toward the end of May, I think part of our practice will be how do we keep the structures intact without sacrificing them to our changing feelings, and how do we keep our feelings intact without necessarily losing the structures. And so this is part of the dance as we go toward the end of the month. And of course, we are blessed with the fact that Mercury trining Pluto is going to give us some ability to communicate about those things that are really important, significant, that are deep and transformative. And then as we push closer to the end of the month goes out with what's that McLeish poem, A Bang and a Whimper? And that is the bang here, and I'm going to add back in, I'm going to add back in displayed aspected points, and I'm going to add back in the moon here, just so that you can see that as we get closer to May 29th at 7 in the morning, May 29th at 7 in the morning, roughly here. There we go. There's close enough. There's the full moon. Now, the sun has moved on into Gemini, and so that means the full moon is going to be opposite the sun in Gemini, which means that we have the Sagittarius full moon. And the Sagittarius full moon is about the part of us that instinctually knows that everything is possible, that big ideas, the inspiration, the expanse, life is an adventure, got to take it, got to go wherever we can go, and that's in juxtaposition to the Gemini sun, which is just trying to connect the dots and keep all the information going. You see, Gemini and Sagittarius, what they have in common is they're both information. They're both about movement. Thinking is the shortest distance between 2 points, not a straight line. And so in Gemini, that thinking is the connecting the dots, the switchboard operator, the connecting this with that, the information. I sometimes call Geminis the information sluts of the zodiac, because they don't care whether something is useful. They don't even care if it's true. They just want data, and they want things to connect to other things. And it's everything is important. Everything. I had a friend who was a Gemini who for many years signed his emails with his name, and underneath it said, "Just another data point." I thought it was it's such a Gemini thing. Now, compare that with Sagittarius, which is not interested in this noise of connecting the dots. Instead, it wants to go for the big picture. It wants to take 1 point and do whatever it needs to do to connect it to the one important dot in the distance. And this would be a philosophical idea, a religion, a conception, a nationalistic point of view, blah, 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 blah. And so at this full moon, it's an idea full moon, and it's very important. But the thing that sits behind this full moon that is very significant is this grand water trine. So we have a full moon in fire and air, fire, Sagittarius, air, Gemini. It's thinking, fire, and it's action, air, male, young energy. But we have Jupiter, which is still in that trine with Neptune, and Venus, which is at 11 degrees of Cancer, and over the next few days, even though it moves on into June, and as you know, I'm not allowed contractually to talk about June. Well, I'm kidding. But over the first few days of June, that Venus moves further into making this grand trine or grand triangle between Jupiter in watery Scorpio, Neptune in watery Pisces, which we talked about, and now we have the personalization of that Venus suite and holding the energy in Cancer. And so I think it's a very fascinating juxtaposition of the kind of noisy, thinking, energetic Sagittarius full moon to this developing feeling behind it. There's May in a nutshell. Okay, it might have been a bombshell. No, but it's a nutshell. We don't need bombs. No more bombs. In a very brief summary, I'm really looking at the period from around the 9th to the 16th as being the fulcrum point, the turning point. And I think that as we move from now, the beginning of the month, to then, I think a lot of what we're doing, even though Mercury is not retrograde, it's still about cleaning up old stuff, finishing up old business, getting ready so that when the transitions begin to manifest, that we're able to move with them with grace, with intelligence, with awareness, with kindness. That's all we can do. We can't change the world out there. We can only change the world in here, one breath at a time. Thank you all You're awesome. I appreciate your attendance and your indulgence.